Identify and book the world's best speakers for your next event. MENA Speakers is the leading speakers and MC bureau in the Middle East. We bring global talent to the region and have established the region as a key global hub for speakers. Inspire and motivate your audience. Find exactly what you are looking for by working closely with us to assist you in understanding the cost-benefit analysis tied to selecting a speaker for any event. Ensure that your audience is educated, engaged, and empowered. Connect with us for a quick response and tailored advice. Book your speakers now.
Good afternoon, good morning, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it's the CEO series. Our guest today is Jim Harter, Chief Scientist for Gallup's Workplace Management and Wellbeing Practice. He is the co-author of the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Wellbeing at Work, released in 2021, a book that explores how to build resilient and thriving teams and organizations. He's also the co-author of the #1 bestseller and Washington Post bestseller, it's The Managers, which is the greatest book ever written for organizational dynamics. Trust me, I recommend it at every opportunity. It was released in 2019, as well as the New York Times bestseller, The Elements of Great Managing, and an exploration of the 12 crucial elements for creating and harnessing employee engagement. And with that, I want to welcome Jim Harter. Jim, welcome to our show.
Great to be with you, Ron. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so glad to have you here as a guest. I'm a big fan of Gallup, as we have been talking about, before. So talk to us about the new book. What were some key findings in that book? Because, we hear well-being is, I don't want to say it's the cool thing to do now. Everybody's talking about it. What does the research say concerning well-being?
Well, we started seeing a trend even pre-COVID where the newer workforce was asking for an employer who not only gave them a good job, but also improved their overall lives. And so it was an expectation that it was starting to separate employees, prospective employees, in terms of the employer that they would pick to go work for. And COVID hit, and we started seeing big increases, even prior to COVID, I should say. We've been tracking this globally. We'd been seeing over time increases in some of the negative emotions like stress, worry, anger, sadness among workers. And it was sort of magnified, amplified during COVID. But even the U.S. Census Bureau reported significant increases since 2014 in the percentage of people who had symptoms of anxiety and depression. Yeah. And the workplace can play a big role in that. So, and it isn't all about fixing the negatives, because part of fixing the negatives means that we've got to get things right from a positive and aspirational standpoint in organizations, so that people can see what their purpose is in the organization. And so organizations play a huge role. And as you mentioned, Ron, we wrote another wellbeing book back in 2010 because we saw this big need to address the health issues inside organizations. This book was much more about not just defining which elements are important, but also how you create a culture inside an organization that gives people the best chance to be thriving overall in their lives.
So how do we make the business case for that? So we all deal with leaders across the globe, and some of them from time to time are tone deaf, and they don't understand the well-being concept or the soft side. Can we make a business case to why this is important?
I think there are two really important reasons for leaders to take it seriously and to explain why to their workforce it's important. One is, and we've learned this, of course, significantly during COVID and this forced work experiment all of us have gone through, but the organizations that had highly engaged workplaces pre-COVID were more resilient. So resilience is a big reason. And to be resilient and have a resilient workforce, we've got to think about not just engaging workers, but also the whole person. Because even if a worker's engaged at work and they're not thriving in their overall life, they've got significantly higher rates of burnout, 61% higher likelihood of burnout, to say they're burnout often or always. And burned out employees don't perform very well. They've got psychological aspects of their life. They're kind of dragging them down. They can't bring their whole selves to work. So that's one thing, is resilience. The other is, I mentioned, kind of alluded to a little bit ago, the employment brand. If you want to attract stars going into the future, you're going to have to build a culture that's authentic, in the sense that you're actually creating one that gives people a chance to thrive overall in their lives. And organizations can play a big role in that. It starts with engaging the workforce, because when you engage your workforce in their work itself, give them a clear role, give them a chance to do what they do best, recognize them when they do good work, you're starting to build trust. And when you build trust, people are more open-minded about all the other things that you can do for them. And whether it's policies, programs, perks, or especially a great manager. The business case is that taking care of the whole person affects your business outcomes, because it affects how resilient they'll be, and it affects whether you can attract the best workforce going into the future.
Yeah. I used that analogy this past week, developing the whole person. And so hear me out on this, and you'd let me know whether I'm on the right track. So I'm thinking the whole person is a 360 of, say, managing people. But if I'm managing from a KPI deliverables, I'm doing only 180. 360 is understanding the underpinnings of stress and all the things that this person or empathy they may be going through from that side. So from a leader's perspective, I look at you 360. Was I correct in making that statement?
I think, looking at you from a 360 standpoint, and from the perspective of what the employer can do. I think most leaders out there know they can't do everything for individuals. Yeah. And some of what leads to anxiety and depression can be predisposed to some extent. But organizations can develop a culture that gives the employee the best chance to from that 360 perspective, Ron. And we've actually put some dimensions on that in terms of what employers can do and what aspects of well-being they can impact on through all the different things they do. And we kind of break down what some of those things can be from a practical standpoint.
Okay. Were those the 5 in the book, Well-Being at Work, 5 dimensions? Is that the 5 dimensions you're talking about?
Yeah. And it starts with your career. And do you like what you do every day? So do you get people in a position where they can do what they do best, and where they get recognized for it, and where they can use their strengths on a regular basis? So career well-being is the foundation, and social well-being is very foundational as well. Do you have meaningful friendships? We know that at work, we don't leave our human self behind. We bring it with us. And the relationships we have with the people we work with are extremely important. The organizations that are working on engagement the way that Gallup would prescribe it are already working on career and social well-being. So they're really setting the foundation for the other 3, getting the other 3 dimensions right. Financial well-being, of course, is important. That's not just about how much money people make, but how they use their money. Do they manage their money well to reduce stress and increase long-term security? And organizations can play a big role there in providing guidance and resources. Of course, physical well-being is in there. That is in part about disease burden that people have, but we all know people who have, or maybe we are some of those people who have some disease burden we had nothing to do with, but we can manage our lives so that we have enough energy to get things done. And that's kind of what's underneath that one. How do we help people bring high energy to work every day and have a high energy workplace? Then the 5th one is community well-being, and that's really whether people like where they live. And at a basic level, it's living somewhere safe, where you're not fearing for your life. At a high level, it's about getting involved in your community in a way that's right for you individually, where you're giving back and contributing.
Okay. So 5 interested me, caused me to kind of think through that, because we hear the concept of WFA, working from anywhere. And if I'm working in, say New York City or San Francisco, but during this period, I get an opportunity to say, I can work any place I want. I talked to a friend of mine who moved from New York to Costa Rica, and she runs her business out of Costa Rica. And she talked through the mindset of not having the stress of being where it is. That's exactly what you were just talking about.
Yeah. And, working from wherever it works for you has of course been so important the last year and a half or so, but there's some really important conduits to making that work right. And it puts more pressure on managing. It also puts more pressure on how individuals manage their own work situation so that they can have high energy and they don't have too many distractions. And but yeah, that's one of the beauties of technology. The first thing I said when COVID hit all of us was thank God for technology. Can you imagine trying to figure this out?
Yeah. Like doing our parents' jobs, but during that era, it would never have worked. Yeah. So if we look at it from that vantage point, if a CEO is listening, and we have quite a few CEOs tune in every week that listens to the program, what is the organization's role in trying to drive, say, these 5 themes through? Should that be embedded inside of the culture of the organization? Here's what we're trying to do to connect. How do we take that from here and bring it to life inside of the organization?
Yeah, that's a really important question because we have to get it down. We have to take the science and get it down to a practical kind of perspective so we can get it applied. And it really starts, I think, with using those 5 elements, which we discovered through our global research are linked to having a thriving life and reduce the chance that you're going to be struggling or suffering. Use those 5 elements as an organizing structure so people know why what you provide them exists in the first place. So organize things around those 5 elements. Second, it's important that it starts at the CEO's office. What the initiatives that start at the CEO's office tend to work best. And people need to not only know that this is an intended part of the culture we're trying to build, they need to know why. And the whys can be very transparent. One is we want you to be as resilient as possible. Yeah. Because you'll be better when you're working and working on all your goals that you put in place, and having the kinds of conversations that you're having with your coworkers, you're going to have high energy and be more resilient. That's one reason. The second one is that if we build this kind of a culture, we're going to attract the best people going forward. And I think just explaining that clearly to people why you're doing what you're doing and not just making it kind of something that might seem to employees as something soft we're going to do because we're trying to show you that we care about you. And that might be the case, but it's not enough to just say, we want to show you we care about you. People need to know the business reason for why you're doing it as well. I think that makes it feel a lot more real. We've got to equip managers with the ability to have the right kinds of conversations with people. Ron, you mentioned that book, It's the Manager, is really built around the concept of who in the organization is in the best position to know each person's unique situation and to accommodate for that and develop people based on their unique situation. Everything I've studied with regard to well-being and engagement, or most of the factors that lead to high well-being and engagement, are very situational individual, and managers are in the best position to understand those situations. A leader from a distance is going to have a really tough time doing that. They can put some policies in place, some programs, et cetera, but it really kind of comes down to the manager knowing the person, especially when you talked about earlier on us working from all over the place. The manager's got to know that situation and know what they're dealing with so that they can give them the right kind of, help them set the right goals, give them the right kind of feedback on an ongoing basis, and have high accountability within the workplace. So developing managers and putting them on a journey to where they can become more like a coach than a boss is really important. Was before COVID, is even more now. Organizations can also develop well-being coaches internally they're separate from their managers, that can provide resources and can become experts at those different elements of well-being. And they can study best practices within the organization and share those best practices, so people can kind of know, yeah, this is achievable, and this is something that I can do, and here's someone I can partner with that's on the same journey as I am. And then finally, I think every organization can actually hold themselves accountable in terms of what they offer employees by studying what do people participate in, what do they find useful. Even statistically, we can study whether different programs that are in place actually do lead to higher levels of well-being. So I think those are some of the things I'd start with when you're trying to build a culture.
Okay. So I've been reading a lot of articles about the leadership competencies and how they've switched to, post-COVID. So if we're talking through the 5 points of well-being, that means that I'm going to extrapolate for a second. That means that leaders are going to have to learn some new tools from their side, from the pre-COVID to post-COVID, to be more effective in creating a well-being environment, whether that's in teams, departments, or whatever throughout the organization.
Yeah, I think so. It's partially what they make available to employees, but it's also how they improve their own well-being and how they kind of become an example for that and share some of their own stories. And how they develop their own teams. So leaders in organizations can affect through a cascade the entire workplace by thinking about the well-being of the people that report directly to them and their own well-being. So keeping it fairly local, that sets the kind of standard for what the organization's really authentically about. As opposed to, doing a check the box kind of wellness program or something where people could easily say, well, we're doing that thing. But so living it, I guess, is my point.
Yeah.
And leaders have to kind of start, I think, if they want to build that kind of culture, by starting to live it themselves.
Yeah. Live, eat, breathe, and sleep it.
Yeah.
And it cascades down throughout the organization. For people that are, say, in transition now, I don't want to say out of work, they're in transition, and they're trying to find a place. Maybe they had a bad experience before. How would a person who's looking for a job get a sense of, from the outside, it looks cool, but I want to get a sense of what it is inside? Because I like the 5 points, or how do I get a sense of that? Because I can't really see that from the interview process of whatever. How can I get a sense of what it's like to work there?
Well, I think a lot of people are right now through social media, and that's kind of a difference between our current days as opposed to past decades, where an organization could advertise what they're about, and somebody gets hired and they find out it's not like that at all. And so connecting with people who actually work there is very possible now through social media. And you have to be a little careful with it, because some of it might not be representative, right?
Yeah.
So it's, you're getting little bits and pieces about an organization through social media. But I would also kind of evaluate what they're doing for their communities. You could go down that list and think about I guess the other thing I think is important when you're interviewing an organization. You can ask questions about each of those 5 elements and what the organization is doing, and how they've kind of thought through those different aspects of well-being and what they're and how they're putting together their culture and reinforcing their culture with what they're intentionally doing. So I'd really look for intentional things that organizations are doing to address well-being.
Yeah. So that, as you said, they could ask questions. So that took me to another loop, because I saw a thread online that someone asked the recruiter, what was the culture like here, and asking the soft side of the underbelly of the organization. And they said they were so shocked because the recruiter had no clue as to what they meant by that. And they just kind of gave them kind of an off the cuff kind of response. But this person on this side was interested in that and knew that the response was not what it should be. So that takes us to another level. So if these are the gatekeepers, should we concentrate and make sure that the people that are the first touch point are making that difference, or our website connects to that, and we talk through these kinds of things. Because I look at so many companies' website and they go on and on about everything, but if I click on people to see what it's like to work, there's nothing there. It's always about the business side and what we do.
That's a really good point, to look for evidence. If an organization is really authentically working on building a thriving, what we call a net thriving culture, it's going to show up in how they attract people. It's going to show up in how they go about how they treat people when they're hiring them. It's going to show up in their onboarding. It's going to show up in how they engage their employees. It's going to show up in how they work on performance management. It's going to show up in the learning and development they provide. And it's even going to show up in how people depart the organization.
Yeah.
And so I think that organizations have to be very intentional through that whole life cycle about how whatever culture they're trying to build, it's I keep using the word intentional, but it's that it is a planned kind of process about how you are addressing your culture in each of those kind of life cycle stages. And it's got to show up in the organization's purpose as well, not just a purpose statement. One thing we've seen in recent history, Ron, is when many organizations have tried to address well-being through perks, ping pong tables, latte machines, free lunches.
Don't even start me.
That might attract some people, but it's not likely to keep them there. And it's, don't assume that those boxes you check are going to get you a culture.
Yeah. You know what? Now that kind of resonated with me because someone posted on one of the sites the other day, engagement levels low, we had low turnover. What are some of the things I can offer? And this is what bothers me about this profession sometimes. They said, well, you could do free breakfast, you could do all this kind of thing. I said, you're bribing people. That has nothing to do with the question that was asked. Diagnose the problem first to see what it is, and then you move from there. Right. And so that's why I started laughing when you said that, because they'll look at the Google and the Facebook, they offer all these things. Well, they got all the money in the world. They can offer these things, but you know what? People still leave there.
It's not the starting point.
Yeah.
It's good. It's fine to have those things. I could see how someone could play ping pong and get to know someone a little bit better, but it's not the and who's going to turn down a free lunch, right? But, but it's not they miss the starting point. The starting point is arming managers with the capacity to coach people so that they can develop. The number one reason people join organizations is career development, but unfortunately, about 2/3 of people who change jobs change organizations. So that basic of where am I headed in this organization is just missing in most places.
You mentioned change organization because we're going back, a few years back, and the thought was people leave managers. But I kind of came to this a while ago and said, people leave organizations. If the organization is just screwed, I could have the greatest manager, but you know what? I'm just headed to here and I'm out.
Well, people leave organizations largely because of the relationship they have with their manager. And the manager's in a position where so the organization could have a great, system in place for people to see where they can develop. But if the manager's not working with the employee intentionally and having those conversations on an ongoing basis about what you're doing today and what you can be doing in the future, and what your career path could look like inside the organization, it won't resonate with them. Even if the organization has the most designed set of career paths, or if let's say they've got a high performer that they hoard. This happens a lot where a manager might have a high performer that they know that there's other options in the organization, but they're not exposing them to them, or they're shutting them down when they try to go that path because they're trying to take care of today. Well, the best managers we've studied over time have done what's best for the individual, and they build a brand. because people who move on will say that's the person to work for right there. They'll do what's best for you, and they end up having on average low turnover, even though sometimes they help people move out of the team. Overall, they'll have lower turnover and they'll have higher performance because they've got that brand and they're developing the individual.
Yeah. So I did a succession planning session this week, and one of the questions came up was that a lot of the leaders in the organizations are saying, I don't really want to develop my people because I want them, they're superstars in my department. And if I develop them, they're going to pull them and take them someplace else and move them across the world or whatever it was. So the question came back to me, who owns the talent? Does the organization own the talent, or does the leader in that mindset that I own the talent and I'm going to hoover over my people and not let them move?
I'll give you another answer.
Go ahead.
My answer would be the individual owns their own talent. And they're going to take it right now. You know what the job market is. They're going to take it wherever they want if they don't if they feel like they're being owned, so to speak, right? So it's but what I'm curious as to your thoughts on that, Ron.
My thoughts would be, if I had a team of people, and that was my model. If you were great at what you were doing, if there was other opportunity, I was kind of the mother hen. I wanted you to grow. Leave me, go do something else. And I'll give you an example of that. The young lady who ran the training and development and reported into me was fantastically smart and capable. And at that time, Martha Stewart was starting a radio program, a radio station through Sirius Radio. And I said, in one of our meetings, I said, why don't you pitch career development? You're big on career development. They're trying to find content for this program. Why don't you pitch this to the leader and you see where it goes? And she says, oh, no, I don't think that would work. I said, try it. She tried it and she pitched it, and she ended up getting a show. And eventually she ended up leaving the organization because she became kind of a national career coach. Very well known, branded throughout the world as a result of that. And I look back at her career growth, and I'm proud because I had a part in that. Say, go out, leave, go do things and move beyond this. I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, and my mother's mantra was, when you finish college, don't come back. Go out into the world and just explore. So that's always kind of been embedded from my side to do that. And that young lady, if she's listening, was Maggie Mistel, who now lives in Key West, Florida.
That's an awesome story.
Yeah.
You might have some people listening who say, well, that sounds like it's the right thing to do, but right now we've got to get this project done. We've got to get these initiatives done that we're doing right now. And we've got limited people that we can hire. And my response to that would be, you can involve the individual in that discussion, right? We've got these things you can do in the near term, but we're going to ask you to help us get done what we're working on right now, or here's the reality of our situation right now, and to explain that. It doesn't mean that they can't fly their wings, very soon.
Exactly.
But I think people like that you invest in will be very loyal from that perspective, and will dig in because they know that you're doing what's right for them, and they want to do what's right for the organization.
Yeah. So one of the concepts when I do this work, I say organizations build a greenhouse. The greenhouse is that we grow and develop. We grow and develop across the spectrum. When we need something from here, we pull it from here and we pull it here. Some of them will not make it. You're going to make sure they get sunshine. They're going to be developed. Make sure the soil is correct. All these things. But sometimes it just doesn't work out. And you do what you have to do. But the goal of the entire purpose is to build internally. And when you need what you need, you pull from here. And there will be times that you need to go out. But the modus operandi for the organization should be based on we grow our own. That's just my concept. Give me your views on that.
About, I think if you're building an authentic culture, you are growing internally. Gallup is an example of that, where a lot of us, we started off in entry level type. I was an intern when I started at Gallup.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Almost 36 years ago.
Mm.
And we have always put big emphasis on growing internally. Did all my graduate work and everything while I was working full time with Gallup. Is a great way to learn. And I can list off a large number of my current colleagues who had the same process. So I think growing internally is really important for organizations because there's some institutional knowledge that you just can't replace when you bring people in from outside. Sometimes obviously we bring a lot of people in from the outside that have already completed all their degrees and worked in other organizations and all that. But there's a kind of core that I think is really important to keep growing internally.
Okay, cool. So let's take a commercial break, and we'll come back and we'll continue the conversation. So just bear with us for 1 second. A couple of minutes. Okay.
Identify and book the world's best speakers for your next event. MENA Speakers is the leading speakers and MC bureau in the Middle East. We bring global talent to the region and have established the region as a key global hub for speakers. Inspire and motivate your audience. Find exactly what you are looking for by working closely with us to assist you in understanding the cost-benefit analysis tied to selecting a speaker for any event. Ensure that your audience is educated, engaged, and empowered. Connect with us for a quick response and tailored advice. Book your speakers now.
You mentioned earlier Gallup net thriving metric. Can you give us some insights on what that means?
Yeah, at Gallup, we're always looking for the simplest way to capture the most information. And we came across a question that it's really a two-part question that had been developed by a guy named Hadley Cantrell, who worked with our founder, George Gallup, decades ago. And he developed a very creative two-part question where he asked people to imagine a ladder with steps from 0 at the bottom and 10 at the top, where 10 is the best possible life and 0 is the worst possible life, 10 is the best possible life. And everybody can respond to where they're at right now. We ask that all over the world. We conduct a world poll. We have since 2005, and we've asked that question as the lead question on that global poll consistently. And then there's a follow-up question that asks, where do you think you'll be 5 years from now? And so that gets you to hope. We can combine those two 0 to 10s into an index we call net thriving, which is if you're a 7 or above in your present life and 8 or above in the future, then you're categorized as thriving. That links to a lot of different outcomes. There's just so much packed into what people put into that ladder. They can answer it quickly, but you start kind of dissecting what's underneath that, and all 5 of those elements we listed off are in there. And those 5 elements, they don't explain everything, but about a 70% of net thriving, which can range from 0 to 100 in any group that we study. And so it's an index. It doesn't include everything you could measure, but there's a lot packed into it. And that's kind of what we like to do with questions. We like to get down to individual questions that are simple enough for anybody to respond to, but have a lot inside of them and that predict important outcomes in people's lives.
Mm. One of the things that I tell people and that I really appreciate from Gallup is that it's a scientific approach. And when I was a Great Place to Work, you talk to clients, oh, we do our own surveys. I said, how is that done? They said, well, we have 50 questions. And I'm like, okay, you get 50 answers. How do you connect the dots? And there was this stare, when I'd ask that question, because there was no back end. And in survey design, there's a back end that 50 questions the back end is going to tell the story. Each response paints a picture. So for people that are, I don't know, but because of budgetary reasons or whatever it is, they may just try and create their own kinds of surveys. Do these surveys work? Or what advice would you give to someone that maybe does not have the budget, but they're trying to survey a certain topic?
Well, not all questions work. I would make sure that you study. My background is psychological measurement, so I spend quite a bit of time thinking about how questions should be worded, what they predict. But I think the important thing with a question is that it explains a lot of information. So you got some statistical background on what it actually explains. We do that at Gallup. I will admit, I used to torture employees with 100 to 200 question surveys, and I found out it didn't work. So an important part of it captured a lot of information, but it wasn't that useful, right? So we had to kind of boil that down into. We found that you didn't have to ask that many questions to find out how someone feels about their work, but it also has to be actionable. So we design questions like, one of the simplest is, I know what is expected of me at work. Captures a lot of important information. If you don't get that right, then you've got a lot of problems because people are walking around confused at work, and you can act on it. You can clarify expectations and act on it. In the last 7 days of recognition or praise, I've received recognition or praise for doing good work. Another one, very actionable, tends to be really low in most organizations, oddly, but you can act on it by asking people, how do you like to be recognized? What's the best recognition you've ever received? And you can learn a lot from an individual just listening to those kinds of things. So you asked about the budgetary part. We've got a platform that's pretty inexpensive called Gallup Access. We have some questions we've developed that are open to the public. We've got a set that we've just put out there around this topic it's kind of come to the forefront now, but it's been around for a long time, called ESG, and environmental, social, and governance. And we developed a set of items there that we were just given to the public to use, so organizations can put those on their surveys if they want. We've got a database that they can look at and all that. So we have parts of what we do that fit within low budget kind of constraints as well. But I would put a lot of emphasis on questions that you have found have some evidence of validity. They predict something important, and they're actionable. They need to be something that you can do something about.
Okay. As you talk through that, I reference back to, I don't want to say you were a competitor when I was a Great Place to Work, but the Q12. You had 12 questions. We had 52 questions. And that was kind of based on that same concept. You don't need a list, but if the 12 were designed for the back end, it could work.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time, several decades actually, on getting that set down to those 12. And like I said, we started with several hundred. In fact, we still have hundreds of questions in our database, but those 12 explain the most in the simplest way. That also we've done 10 iterations of meta-analysis of those questions, so we know they predict a lot of outcomes that are important to organizations, and they're actionable. We found that managers and leaders can do something about them, and so that's been important. And as one thing that's been really important to us, Ron, in that realm, is that we have kept studying whether it works, but also we haven't changed things with all the flavors of the month that come around. And we've learned so much more by keeping that survey in place and digging deep within each of those concepts that are in it.
Yeah. Thank you for the flavors of the month, because I look at it and said, oh God, not another one. Please give me a break, as it relates to that. What is on your website, Gallup.com? How could someone find those questions that you were talking about? Or
for that ESG set? Yeah, just go to Gallup.com and just search on ESG. We've got a report. We've got blogs we put on there. We've even got a technical report that goes through how we got to those. And there are items around respect, whether people feel they're treated with respect, which is a really important DEI concept, probably the most foundational in all the DEI work that we've done. And there's an item on governance around ethics and integrity, and will leadership do what's right? There's one on whether the organization cares about your overall well-being or not. So we touch on well-being in there. We've got one on development in there, which is one of the Q12 items. And then we've also got one on the people planet. So do people feel their organization is doing what's right for the people and the planet?
Okay.
So it's tied to those concepts that organizations are really focusing on right now.
Okay.
Yeah, just go to Gallup.com. You can find all kinds of information out there.
Okay, cool. So the SEC is discussing human capital metrics, which I think is cool. I mean, that way I can go and take a look and see what turnover is and all those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Give insight on the same type of so-called human capital pricing. Any thoughts on that, of this new reporting procedure for publicly traded companies?
Well, it's related to that ESG concept, I think, in that there are more standards now. People have been attempting standards for a long time. Gallup has been focused more on the people side of all that. And the people side of it, all the cultural things we've been talking about on your show, Ron, are related to some of those, I'd call them accounting metrics, like whether people stay or leave organizations, whether they have good safety practices, and they've got safety metrics. And so as those standards, those accounting standards are being put in place, we really think at Gallup that we need people metric standards as well, because the people, if there's a problem in an organization, the people are the first ones who are going to know. And you can get ahead of issues quickly if you've got metrics that get underneath what people are thinking about in their everyday work and what they're experiencing. So that's the part in all that we think we can play, because we've spent so much time studying questions and writing questions and looking at what they relate to and all that. We feel we owe it to organizations to provide our best advice on that. So that's really why we came up with those 5 ESG. We call them the Gallup Sustainability 5, GS5, but they're and that's why we made them available to everybody to use.
Okay. I could not close out this conversation unless I talk about my favorite book. It's The Managers. I read that book on a flight, and there were so many thoughts that came to me as a result of, because I'm saying, yep, this has happened. So how can we, if we think of boss the coach, I'm the boss, now I'm the coach, what does that transformation look like for someone who's that more of a manager, more of a directive, as opposed to the coach who asks questions? Is that a hard transition, or that depends upon the person? What's your thoughts on that?
I think anybody who's in a managerial position now can make a transition, and the transition goes more from the traditional delegation, which managers come into the job thinking that's their main job is delegation, to having meaningful conversations where, one, you're helping people set goals where they're actually involved in setting their own goals. That doesn't mean that they're exclusively setting their own goals, but they're involved, and that's a big step that gets overlooked. Where they're having at least one meaningful conversation with each employee at least once a week as a minimum. What's meaningful? Well, it means you know something about the work they're doing, their goals, you know something about their strengths, and you can put, and you know something about what's going on in their life, so you can put things in context. And managers, of course, are in the best position to do that. And finally, there's got to be some accountability. So you have to have a system of accountability to coach people effectively, so they know when they're doing well. And it's got to be developmental in terms of the accountability. But those kind of 3 big areas are important. But the other concept I'd like to leave with you on that, Ron, is that it's got to be thought of as more like a journey than an event. Yeah. It can't be a one-off, one-time event if you want it to really develop someone. So the journey should start with science, what the best of science says around engagement, around individual strengths, the strengths of the individual. And what I mean by that is what's innately inside you that has probably been with you for a long time in your life, how you respond to different situations, your strengths and how you can develop around those strengths. And then also the science around performance management. So those need to be foundations that we teach people, because there's been this gap historically between science and practice. We've got to make it practical, and then there's got to be practice on the journey, so that people are able to have practice having the right kinds of conversations. I've seen a lot of people that have never kind of had a really good check-in conversation with somebody and have practiced that. And when they do it, they learn some things they didn't know before, and the light bulb goes off and they said, this makes my job easier. It's not an extra thing. It actually gets me ahead of some issues, or it gives me an idea I hadn't thought of, or the practicing having the right conversations and sharing those experiences with peers, I think, is a really important part of that journey. But it can't just be a one-time thing. It's got to be in iterations.
It's a developmental process. But when you mentioned having that conversation with managers who have never had that, I think here's what I've found is that people that have had great careers and they've moved, they feel they got the model. Now that could work sometimes, and they do have it, but sometimes they're the worst leaders on the planet. But because they have had a great career, they figure I must be doing it right. And I've always found the greatest bit of insight is when you continually have this discussion over a period of time, and they reflect back and say, you know what, I was out of control.
That's interesting. That's an interesting observation. Yeah, there are a lot of people who take that model of progress means I'm going to the next job, so to speak. And there's never enough kind of depth inside an organization with the same team where they really learn what they do best. You do have to spend some time. There's this thing we call tacit knowledge that happens when you're spending a lot of time working with the same team, and that it's hard to replace that. There have been studies that show even the surgeons that switch teams aren't as effective. Athletes, same thing. I mean, there's something about that tacit knowledge with a team that you pick up and you learn about your own management style and how you use your strengths effectively and work with others. So if I do something, how does somebody else react to that? That's all part of what you learn when you work with the same people for a while.
Jim, thank you so much. We have explored. We could continue this for another hour easily. We've touched on so many key points, but timing runs out as a result. So thank you for being a guest. Just hold on for a second as we close out, because I want to speak to you beyond the closeout.
Thanks for having me, Ron.
Thank you.